we discussed more of the aspect of religion, but I guess it applies to everything in general. Why should you listen to someone that's got, hey, excuse me, oh, that's yours. Why should you listen to someone that's got an opinion based on the title that they have? Or should you even do that?
Let's check that you're
in frame. Appreciate
in
it.
frame.
Yeah, it is nice mugs.
These are.
These are, yeah.
It's worthwhile displaying them.
Appreciate it.
The water off the
The podcast, yes. Well, it's so funny. This is like full circle moment for me because the whole time that I was planning on having you here, the thing that was in my mind the most was pouring you water, because the first memory of you was you actually pouring me water in that Adobe event, and I was like, oh, what a gentleman, what a nice guy, right?
Now, sorry, I interrupted you. Kind of, you on your kind of discussing why listen to people.
Yes.
Kind of just because of
their titles.
Yeah, and titles are very cultural. In Italy, every teacher is professore.
Ooh.
Yes. In where I originally come from, once a professor, always a professor.
Okay.
In Australia, it's a job title. So when you retire, you become doctor again. It's cultural.
Based on the culture that we live in, then, how big is the title? How important is the title? Is it something that you just call someone when you get them when you give them the credit, or is it something that sticks to them and it labels them throughout their whole life?
I think it's slightly different in Australia because people it's so kind of job connected. Many really good scholars may, for various reasons, reach a point where they not professor any longer and they don't use the title. While they have it, it does have an impact. It can improve service that you get because of assumptions made.
Yes.
Ideally, it should only lend some credence within that specific sphere of knowledge that the person has, because it does say something about the level of knowledge. Not that much, because there are many younger scholars and academics kind of on the trajectory, often with high levels of expertise. I think the title says something about time spent in the system, which also links to skills accrued in conjunction with the knowledge.
Okay.
So it indicates some level of seniority, but it shouldn't be overblown.
Yeah. I think I discussed it way too aggressively last night with my friends because we delved into the religious side of things when we were talking about how, because I come from a religious background, obviously, and in my culture, religion is a really huge thing. And once a priest in that culture, he's deemed of a higher socioeconomic level, in a way, he's gone up a step in that whole hierarchy in the community. And so you listen when a priest is talking, and so they have their effect. But then if that priest talks in a way that is subjective and kind of twists, or not twists, it is what he thinks, and it's not necessarily the objective truth, which is very hard to put your finger on in that specific field. Obviously, should you listen at that point blindly? Because a lot of people do. They fall into that trap where they just listen just because this guy is a priest, just because this guy is a doctor too. And we saw this thing happen in this place as well. A lot of people listen just because a doctor. We had it like 2 years ago.
So in that context, just in terms of the hierarchy, who does the priest report to?
A higher priest, right?
And who do they report to?
Someone higher.
Kind of what's the hierarchy?
So in the religious sphere, you mean?
Yes.
I think it goes.
Okay, your specific example.
My example, yeah. From my perspective, I think it goes people. What do they call the people that work underneath the priests, like the bishops and whatnot? Priests.
Well, bishops would normally be higher.
Higher? No, this the ones that are serving, the servants in the church. They're not bishops, quite per se.
I come because you're now speaking about a kind of Christian environment, and I come from a Christian reformist environment where we don't have
that's
that.
Not a thing, yeah.
It became democratized. It's the Roman Catholic Church that has the hierarchy up to the Pope. But it's also interesting, and it's not something that I've worked with a lot, but I was brought into some discussions and conferences around Islamic law and financial services, and Islamic or products designed to comply with Islamic law, which is very much religious, but there are some problems because in the Christian Roman Catholic tradition, there's always an absolute truth.
Yes.
In the end, it's what the Pope says determines.
Yes.
But apparently, in Islam, it's very much more personal.
Okay.
And the one person's understanding of the Quran is as valid as another person's understanding of the Quran. So when you put out a product that you say is compliant, is it compliant with your view? Is it also compliant with everyone else's view? So there's a certification process involved, and they developed specific products, put them out, and extended, in essence, credit based on them. And when it came to payment, the borrowers, when they got other opinions saying, no, this is not Islamic. So payment of that would be in breach of the core principles. So they refused to pay. That led to kind of breakdowns because is this product compliant or not? We would go to courts who would then apply the Roman Catholic absolute truth. That is not possible to the same extent within an Islamic context. So it's interesting how hierarchies can work, but also complexities if you remove the hierarchy totally, and it becomes personalized. That was not a problem until they started to mix religion and financial services.
Actually, just before we keep going, I need to fix one thing right there before we keep going.
All right.
Sabbath Hammurabi codes. Yeah.
Wow.
You would probably know about it.
I would. Yeah. I actually have a Victorian book with a translation, but I've never seen. And then Code of Edla, that's a little bit older.
What's the code?
Which is relevant because there are still some principles of our business law that derives from the Code
they
of
still
Hammurabi.
Work, right? Right.
Have you read the Code of Hammurabi?
Not all of it. I've read some of it.
It's very much eye to eye, and well, if you can see the parallels with the Old Testament law, the old Mosaic laws,
but also very extreme. I've read some of the laws over there. They don't mess around. They don't mess around.
No, it was basically tit for tat. You kill my slave, I kill your slave.
Pretty much, yeah.
If the doctor, if something went wrong with the operation and he can't save your arm, well, he may lose his arm.
Yeah,
it's just
What do you think is very? Because obviously we've shifted as a society from that to this. Do you think we still apply some of the concepts that were put in there? Because why would you put a concept that is, like you said, eye for an eye? That's really extreme. What would drive them to do that? Why would they do that? Given the context that they were living in.
You say we've moved on as society. There are many societies And I've come across some who still practice elements of an eye for an eye. I think it's a simplistic version of justice that appeals to them. But you are correct. I think for the most, we've developed a more sophisticated way of dealing with justice, especially after we kind of transferred our original powers of seeking justice for ourselves to the government and to the state in order to be able to have a more organized and broader society. It's perhaps a principle that can work better with a very small group of people with no central authority. And there are still places in the world where there may be authority in name, but it isn't actually there. And then some people do resort to mob justice.
More tribal.
Tribal too.
Yeah.
And we may be in the 21st century, but it still happens there. And I'm aware of kind of some studies that have been done on aspects of that, but I can't really recall any now that has actually delved into the mindset to say, so why did you think that was justice? And now that you've exacted that justice, do you now feel atoned? Do you now feel made one? You know, having killed the son of the other person because they happened to kill your son, do you now feel you've been made whole?
Yeah. Well, do you think there's an element of psychopathy to the people that do feel like that they do have to do the exact same thing that was done to them by others? Because I was reading a case last night, about the Detroit mother. I don't know if you heard about her. Her name was Michelle Blair or something like that. She's a mother that killed two of her kids because it's very graphic. It's very sad to hear. She's a mother that killed two of her kids because they molested her youngest son. It's very chilling. And I was watching the court interview they were having with her, or not the court, the court filming. She didn't care. She did not care. She didn't try to plead a case. She didn't try to defend herself. She said that she described exactly what she did to her kids, and she said that she would do it again, no problem whatsoever. But it's so bizarre because you think about it. Yes, the kids did something horrible. Obviously, she had a 9-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 7-year-old. Obviously, the 7-year-old was molested by the 9 and 12-year-old. But the way she did, she tortured the kids. She didn't just kill them off. She tortured her own daughter and her own son in name of justice. Obviously, she's doing life in prison right now. But she feels whole. She feels like mission accomplished. So certain people do exist like that. And especially when I was living in Iraq, blood revenge is a thing. You know? The system over there, no one cares about. No one resorts to the justice system over there. Whatever happens over there is going to be trouble. It's going to be, as like you said, we're in the 21st century. People are going to take it to their own hands. They're going to do it regardless. And so what can you do to stop these things from happening? Can you even stop these things from happening? Because we've moved, right? We're a far more sophisticated creature than we have been, say, 2,000 years ago. And even we say that, but maybe, we are not as sophisticated as we think we are.
I think one of the really important steps to be taken is to have a state that you can trust will actually take steps to fairly deal with the contravention, with the offense, that you trust, and with an outcome the majority of people would view as appropriate. And every now and then we struggle in society with, for instance, a penalty that was handed down. Newspapers report a matter. We may not be in the courts, and then we read about the outcome, and instead of sending the person to life imprisonment, they were given 2 years. And I'm not necessarily saying that's correct. Often it's the reporting that failed to try to convey the nuances of the case and what actually happened. And in the end, why that outcome was justified, because we've got good systems securing appropriate outcomes. But if that outrage grows in society and they don't have trust in the system any longer in terms of outcomes, or they don't have trust that steps will be taken, then you may see some of these elements returning again. But to move societies from where they are now, if they are still essentially exacting their own revenge, you can't do that without convincing them that it's more appropriate to hand that to society rather to have that kind of being taken in their own hands. And it's a process. And it's not a perfect process, because we still find that happening today, even in our societies. And in a perfect society, we would not have war. Nations would be able to deal with their differences in a different manner. We do have fewer wars now than we had 100 years ago, but we're still on a journey towards an appropriate outcome. And the same goes for the criminal justice system. And for us, as part of that system, and the criminal justice system doesn't stand apart from us, it is there in order to express our sense of justice. And then you get the outliers. And I think you've just mentioned a great case of that, where regardless of the outcome, the person decided, I will be above the system and I will determine what justice means for me. And unfortunately, there are levels of all types of mental ill health that might affect how people view justice and what they expect from a justice system and what fair is under the circumstances.
But do you think you get that people that are, I know you said it's a process, but from what I've seen, the people that do these things, they're a little bit more barbaric. They're aggressive, they're loud, they take things personal, way too personal, and at times blow things out of proportion. So how do you bargain with those people? They're very difficult people. And I've seen it happen. And I'm talking out of my experience, obviously. Not everyone is the same.
Yeah.
But you would think so.
Look, I'm very conscious to avoid labeling.
Okay.
You get personality types, and you do get that reflected in certain societies too. But yes, handing your power to exact revenge to someone else is a very rational process. And you need people to engage in that. And that means there may be a sense of self-disempowerment. Now, that again needs to be unpacked, because the need to be empowered may be embedded in your cultural context. It's very difficult for you to hand over that power if everyone around you look to you and expect you to exact that revenge yourself.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you are deemed to be, let's say, weak.
Yeah, weak.
If that is the context, that becomes very difficult to set the example. So you need a broader process around cultural transformation. And I mean, these are kind of great 21st century words to use, but essentially that is what happened from kind of in the past 2,000 years, and the Roman law brought in already kind of more than 2,000 years ago a system where society and the state could do this on your behalf. We've been on this path of transition. And at that stage, they did not speak about kind of change management and transformation, but it was part of the process. And where that is still evident, that is essentially what is required. You can't expect of all individuals to just easily do this. You need to understand what their pressures are, and there needs to be a viable alternative. And again, that's our problem in many of the states where this still persists on a larger scale. I don't think we will ever be able to get rid of it fully, even in our systems where rule of law is in a much better shape. Rule of law will probably never be perfect, but it certainly is in a better shape. But you still find elements of people taking the law in their own hands or acting outside of the law to exact revenge because it's emotional.
It is very emotional.
And we need people to act rationally, but that means also those around them need to act rationally. And then if we speak about emotions, we find this type of conduct, I think, is also more prevalent where the original offense was very emotional. Where it's the type of offense that raises emotions. And offenses against children, for example, would fit in that category.
100%.
So taking effective steps to also suppress those types of offenses would probably also be helpful in the transition process.
Well, the thing about this is one small problem. This actually requires people cooperating. It's very hopeful of people to cooperate, and you would expect people to cooperate, which is something that I think has been under fire for the past 2 years, especially after the whole COVID situation. People don't trust the governments anymore. They don't. They've lost their trust in the governments. And so if you want to do something like that as a government, it's very difficult to go up to a person and go, hey, I've got this. Put this things in my hands, I'm going to take care of it. Just trust me. Just trust that the process that we put out, just trust the structure that we've laid out is going to work, especially after what happened in the past 2 years. I don't think I've seen a society that has had more broken trust with its government in the past 23 years that I lived on. Obviously, the first 5-10 years I wasn't as informed. And so I've lived in Iraq, and that government is crushed to its core. And yet I haven't seen as much distrust. Even then, they had patriots and people actually trusting in the government. But this is like an all-time low, don't you think? We've hit as a global society, not just in Australia. People have more doubts in government now than ever. And so how do you convince them of something like that? How do you tell them, hey, listen, just trust me, I'll take care of it?
I'm working with a researcher at the moment who works on regulation of charities and not-for-profits. And in a sense, the over-regulation that we've seen, that is often driven by remarks such as these, that people are losing their trust in not-for-profits, and therefore intervention is required. And I think unpacking that concept is helpful, because trust is a very big label.
It is.
if you go outside this building and you use the road, do you trust other road users to actually stick to their side of the road when you drive?
You try subconsciously.
And I think we've both been in countries where that's not the case.
No, absolutely not.
But here, you would be very surprised. And if that happens, what would you expect?
Well,
If someone crashes into you because they've been driving on the wrong side of the car, and when you get out of your smashed vehicle, they have clearly they've clearly driven under the influence of whatever. What would you expect to happen?
in this country,
Yes.
probably punch a guy. In this suburb, I've seen it. Not me. I wouldn't go as far as punch the dude,
Right.
but I've seen it.
What else would happen?
They'd be both very angry, both very pissed.
Right? What else would happen?
Insurance.
On your car is damaged. The person is injured.
There we
let's
go.
say.
Yeah.
What would happen?
Police, insurance, ambulance.
Police,
Mm.
ambulance. Who sends the police? Who sends the ambulance? That's the state.
Okay.
And you may be angry enough and things may be said in that moment,
Mm.
but you also expect that the state will do what the state should do.
Okay.
And I think around here, that would also be the expectation.
Mm.
So there's an element of trust
Mm.
then. If
Is
if you've got a house fire,
Yeah.
let's just start.
Yeah.
Start from. So there's trust in government to do certain things.
Is it trust or expectation?
It's certainly trust, because you would have no expectation
How come?
without trust. If you have expectations and there's no follow-up, you don't have trust and you won't have expectations.
Okay.
And keep in mind, trust builds through activity.
Mm.
I just reminded, they train dogs also in this way.
Mm.
You build a trust reservoir with an animal.
Yeah.
You meet an animal, they sniff you, they don't trust you.
Mm.
You take out a treat. You give the dog a treat. That builds a bit of trust.
Mm.
They eat it, they like it. You take out a second treat. No, you can see the animal is responding.
Yeah.
You increase that reservoir. When taking out a third, you accidentally step on their toe. Immediately,
Okay, yeah.
you withdraw from that trust.
So kind of backtrack. Yeah.
But compare that to a scenario where the dog doesn't trust you at all, have no relationship, and you step on its toe. What is it going to do? It's going to bite.
Far more worse. Yeah.
In the second scenario, where you've now built a bit of a rapport, the dog there may be enough left in that reservoir to trust you somewhat.
Okay.
So trust is not immediately given. It's built through activity, and that's the expectation.
Yes.
If there's no activity, you wouldn't expect that
Yes.
to happen.
Yeah.
So my argument would be, it's not a question of, yes, we trust fully, and no, we've lost all trust.
Mm.
It's a question of specific things that you trust. And you can trust the government. You may not trust politicians.
Mm.
You may trust the government to deliver appropriate water in your tap, but you may not trust it to do the right thing politically in relation to the environment, for example. So trust is sophisticated, and it's from that kind of perspective that I'd position it. I think in a democracy, no one ever trusts the state fully.
Mm.
And that's where the engagement comes from.
Do you think that's a good thing?
I think it's healthy. I'd be very worried
If everyone trusted
if
blindly?
everyone trusted the government, because nothing in this world is perfect.
Okay.
And if trust and accountability hangs together, so you trust someone and then you keep them accountable, and when they do things wrong, as will happen inevitably, you need to sit back and reassess, and then think what you're going to do around accountability to signal to them, say, we don't like that. We don't want you to do that again. We like the other things that you do, but we don't like this. It's like a human relationship.
Okay.
It's not a question of we best of friends and now we're enemies.
Yeah.
Your best friends also do things that you're not perfectly happy with.
Okay.
And then you sit down and you have a discussion. That's why we've got elections. That's why we have a democratic interaction. In totalitarian states, that's absent.
Yeah. 100%.
And everyone must support what the government does. That's problematic.
Okay. You mentioned something about if the government does something wrong and you hold them accountable. To what extent, or how does it differ if they did something wrong unintentionally, or they weren't aware that it would affect the people in the way that it did, in comparison to if they did something that they were fully aware that this is going to affect the people negatively, but they still went with it? Which one has a more, I would say, less chances of, like, obviously, like if they did something that they knew the people weren't gonna like, that's gonna have a bigger impact on the people, and therefore less of a chance of them actually redeeming that relationship with the people. But they still do it. There's some cases where they're aware that the people aren't in favor of a certain law, of a certain action, of a certain decision, but they still go with it. How do you amend something like that? How do you win the people back? How do you tell them, okay, we did this really miserable thing, we were aware of it, even though they're not going to say that, obviously. But the people are not stupid. The people know when the government does something that was an oopsie, and when they did something that was obviously planned out. And they get called out for both. How do you amend a relationship with a person that you did that to in a way that you would amend a relationship with a friend?
Our relationship with the state differs from that with a friend.
Sure.
Because in a modern society, you can't avoid the state. You can have a total fallout with a friend, and the relationship may totally fall to pieces, and you may never cross paths again. Can't do that with the state. So the relationship with the state and the state behavior is always work in progress from your side. Furthermore,
can't you argue, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can't you argue that you can vote them out and never vote them back in a way, if they were of a specific party? Doesn't that usually how it works?
Yes, but keep in mind too, they don't go away.
Indefinitely,
in the electoral cycle. There's been great minds during the 20th century that's described this in different ways, but essentially, parties govern until they replaced. And what happens? People support Party A. They voted in. As the government, they need to make decisions. Every decision they make makes some people happy, the majority, makes other people, generally the supporters of the other party, less happy. Over time, that patchwork of happiness and unhappiness increases up to a point where, and it may take 4 years, it may take 8, it may take 12. In some cases, it's taken 30 years, where your decisions have angered so many people that the majority
Yes.
now don't want you in government
Yeah,
anymore.
okay.
It's naturally built into the governance process because you can't govern by keeping everyone happy all of the time.
Okay.
We have too much of that at the moment, where policies are made based on the latest polls. What do people think? All right, that's what I'm going to do. Good parties provide leadership. There are also unpopular things that need to be done that people may not support. At the moment, we've got inflationary measures. No one supports having kind of taking the economic hit that we're taking now.
Mm.
But if we don't take it now, it's going to get out of the hand. No one wants that either. But it's unpopular.
Mm.
But for a good government, to be a good government, they need to do things that are unpopular, and people need to sit back and they need to reflect on that. And that means communication. Government needs to communicate, and government needs to be honest. This is not a popular measure, but this is an emergency. It is urgent. And we need good communication and rational behavior on both sides. Don't inflict more punishment than actually required, but also don't be so short-sighted as voters that you only focus on the here and the now. We are neglecting climate change because of that. We are neglecting big ticket issues because it's not popular at the moment, because the pain will be felt now and the benefit will be reaped by future generations. And that's difficult. We need to move out of those cycles.
Do you think climate change is really that dangerous?
I think we're already seeing it's dangerous. I'm working into the Pacific at the moment.
Okay.
They expect in this season that the Pacific will have double the number of cyclones that it would normally have. I don't know whether you saw the hurricane that slammed into Acapulco over the weekend. It looks like a war zone.
Yeah, I saw that.
The most powerful event to reach their shores. We look at the fires. The fire in Queensland at the moment, and our season hasn't started yet in Victoria. We look at what happened in Canada, at Europe. On last year, the UK looked like Africa. On Oxford and Cambridge, that's normally green and lush, looked like Central Africa, parts that I recognize in the summer. Something's happening, and I think science is clear on that. Then we've got debate. So what's driving it? Is it humans, or is this just kind of general nature? Let's not get into that. Let's take climate change is a reality at the moment. There are very few credible scientists not saying that the patterns now look different to the patterns that we've become accustomed to. Yeah. And we need to prepare for that. And how many more homes will we build in zones that are highly likely to flood? How will we build into areas, well, we clearly require more housing, but into areas that will pose danger to people who live there? How do we do that? How do we prepare for the changes that we can envisage at this stage? Is enough being done at the moment? Those are debates that we can have without falling into the kind of trap that have been forming around the fundamental, what are the drivers of this in the past 20 years?
Yeah, I think the conversation is like most of the times people miss the plot. They miss the important questions. It's not a matter of is it real or is it not, because you'd have to be very blind to deny something like that. Obviously, it's happening. And it's like you said, it's a question of what can we do about it? What realistically can we do about it? It's something that's been happening for gazillion of years. If we're talking about the way that Earth has been changing, if we're talking about the weather that fluctuated over X amount of years, I mean, it gave birth to a whole species, right? Well, not just one, probably a few millions. We know that Earth has
And
always been
wiped
doing
out
that.
others.
Sorry?
And wiped out others.
Wiped out others. But we know that that's natural. That's the way Earth, or at least natural in the context of how Earth works. It's always going through something. It's always going through emotion, and it's not gonna slow down. We know that I think we're getting closer to the sun. That's why we're heating up more. Earth has probably never been hotter. And with that being said, it's not all that bad. Yes, we have the South Pole melting, I believe, right now, right? But that also means that there's more land. There's more land on Earth to discover, because that's essentially how we discovered a few continents. A few continents were covered in ice during the Ice Age, and then heated up more. More land was discovered. People went to that place, and they started new life forms. They started new lives. They started populating that place. And so I don't know if it's totally that bad, or is it being blown out of proportion. But the question of is it real or not, it's very much real. We can feel it, we can see it. And the people that do these studies, they're not talking out of their ass. They know what they're talking about. They've done the studies, and they're very credible, obviously. But what can we do about it?
So on increasing land, keep in mind the more the ice caps melt, the higher the sea levels go, the more land we lose along the edges of the continents, and we have countries that may disappear, especially Pacific nations, because the whole country is fairly low lying. So if the sea level rises, think about the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. There may be no country left.
Isn't that what's happening in Venice right now as well?
Venice has been under pressure, but yes, and the Netherlands have been dealing with the effects of the sea and the lands that they've reclaimed. So I think we can see how climate change will affect our immediate environment. And the question is, are we doing the right things now to be prepared for that?
What could be these things? How do you prepare for that? And what are we up against?
How much more development will we allow in areas that are most probably going to be flooded? And that's sensitive because people live on the coast and love living there, like living next to the beach, and it's very expensive property.
It is.
How will we deal with that?
And then you can't just tell them to stop developing that area.
And at some stage, the properties may become uninsurable, and that's problematic.
Very.
I think, like you, this is not my area of specialization. I'm just a global citizen.
No.
I read, I'm concerned, and if we come back to trusting government, this is a good example of measures that are popular or unpopular, and for some very controversial. Do you govern by listening to the latest poll and the views of people who have not read a lot about this? And that determines the country's policy because you want to remain in power? Or do you take unpopular decisions now? Where does leadership fit in? Because we want our governments to be leaders too. But that means that they may be ahead of us. And that brings us back to the general challenges of leadership. A leader needs to walk in front, but the leader also needs to take people with on that journey. Otherwise, attention develops and you may be so far in front, you actually walk on your own. You lose that leadership position and the people haven't made progress.
Well, the thing with climate change is it's one of those topics that everyone has an opinion about because it can be subjective. Now, I don't know if it's subjective or objective. The fact that it exists is objective. The fact that the debate of what can we do about it is subjective. Do we do something now? Do we let it happen? I don't think we can say that because we haven't really seen what it can really do from now to 10, 20, 30 years. We're talking about the possibility of cities sinking, like you said. For all we know, we could have another ice age. We don't know. Or not ice age, the reverse of an ice age.
We could, but keep in mind that scientists studying those early events, it seemed that whenever there was a dramatic climatic shift, there was specific reason for that, which could be a giant meteorite slamming into Earth. There was an intervention. It wasn't human, but there was a big event happening. Certainly, if you look at statistics, things seem to have changed in different ways over the past 200 years. They can make projections, and they have been making projections over the past years. And we can actually track what we were experiencing now against the projections made 20, 30 years ago. And if those projections seem to be on track, we might give them a little bit more credibility. And the problem is, again, interestingly, so why are people so divided about climate change?
You mean why divided about the fact that it exists or not?
Absolutely. Why? And then if you unpack, you find very specific strategies, especially corporate strategies and funding, especially from the extractive minerals industry, that provides information that does not have a lot of scientific basis to it. There are corporate profits, and people have been getting very rich out of doing things that they don't want governments to intervene into. And that is a pity. And there's a lot of big issues that we're grappling with globally where the quality of information that we have has become very questionable. We live in an information or in an era of false information, dubious facts, 100%. And they are deliberately created. And the question is why? And that's going to be problematic, especially for your generation and going forward. Whatever you do, someone else can, with great credibility, say, according to social media, well, you haven't done it.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. There has never been more fabrication of the content that we consume than ever. Never have been. And the fact that it's not just the fabrication, it's who fabricates what. It can be anyone. Anyone can fabricate anything at the click of a button. It's so easy nowadays. You can argue, like back in the day, if you wanted to serve people false information, you'd have to be a higher up at a newspaper to do that. And then, even then, you're running a risk. But there was no social media, so newspapers and mainstream media could get away with it. Nowadays, they can't. But with the whole rise of AI, I highly doubt that. you can easily fabricate a photo of Trump having tea with the Saudis. It's just a click of a button, and it looks so real.
You can
looks
have a
real.
video of that.
You can have a video of that, right?
With them speaking.
Yeah,
in
with
their voices.
accurate voices, accurate tones.
And I'm really concerned that not enough is being done to prevent that.
To regulate it?
To regulate it, but what also needs to be regulated is mainstream media. Mainstream media has not been objective.
No. No, never been. I don't remember.
And we come from eras where there were better controls, but it's always sensitive because the control shouldn't interfere with free speech.
Yes.
But you do reach limits where the speech itself has no factual basis.
Okay.
And if it pretends to be factual while lacking that, and we've paid a high price for that, and the price will continue to increase. So I'm worried about that.
It is very interesting. It's something that I always wanted to figure out. How did it work back then? Because obviously I wasn't born in that era. I didn't get to see it. All I get to see is this era where, or at least the one that I'm conscious of, when I actually started getting conscious, obviously after a few years of my life. But what I'm trying to say is, you say that wasn't always the case. Mainstream media used to have a reliability of some sort. But during this time, something must have happened.
Yes.
What exactly happened?
And again, not my area of specialization, but generally we had rules requiring publication to be fair and accurate. Accurate meant a newspaper couldn't write something without checking the facts. And then fair, it had to reflect the facts in a fair manner, providing a fair opportunity for response before they put out an article.
But was there a referee to judge?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Was there a referee?
There was a press council.
Okay.
And a press ombudsman. And the system worked fairly effectively. But then we had the slide into news as entertainment, infotainment, which is not regulated news. And that's basically where the Murdoch empire, in terms of its televised broadcast, positioned itself. And you had the rise of opinions. And the figures who would voice, they won't provide news, they provide their views on the news. And that slid out from under the control.
Okay.
And because these were opinions, they weren't held to the same standard. And we've seen the impact of that politically, I believe also in this country. That's problematic. It can be brought under the same umbrella again, because we've seen the dangers and we've seen the impact. Now, whether governments will take action, that is another question. But I do think leadership there is required. It's ripping societies apart.
Yeah.
And linked to that, we're at the start of I think a more serious debate at the moment in Australia around truth in political advertising. Same. Be accurate, be fair, but you can put your point forward, but you can't fabricate.
Do you think it's lacking? Do you think it's lacking?
I think we've seen it's lacking.
Okay.
And the debate is increasing, and I think it's important for the younger generations to join that and push for that. It's not dangerous to require people to engage in debate using facts that are accurate and fair. Let's have a debate on opinions. Let's not make a debate about what is actually the truth of the issue that is being debated.
But I think even trying to figure out what is the truth is a challenge in and of itself. You can 100% spin the truth one way or another, especially today. It is so easy to fabricate something, and we are seeing it happen today, especially in the whole Palestine-Israel conflict. I don't know what's going on. I've refrained from talking about that subject because I don't know what's going on. I can't realistically sit down here and say this side is good, this side is bad, just because I've seen videos online of what's happening. We don't know what's going on. It's so bizarre. And the fact that the governments themselves use these tactics to try to flip the narrative one way or another. It's not even the media at this point. It's the government, it's the politicians that try to convince people of something that is not true. It's not real. It didn't happen. And they try to tell you that it happened just so they can get you to be convinced of an idea. And then when you sit down to argue, you're going to argue on the basis that that thing actually took place. It actually happened. One of those things was the hospital bombing when it first came out in Gaza. The hospital bombing, everyone, flipped. They lost their minds. And you watch the videos and then you see that this is something that is horrible. And then a few people came out and said, they did this, they did that, they did this. And after a while, no one knows. After a few weeks, no one knows whether it was terrorists, whether it was governments. No one knows. No one knows. And some people could sit down and defend these things with their lives. They lose relationships. They lose friendships. They most importantly lose credibility. And it puts the society in a state of distortion, a state of chaos. It's utter chaos. No one knows what's going on. It's so loud.
So, if I may intervene, there are a number of cases that we could discuss. We could move it to the possibly from an Australian perspective, less controversial Trump presidency and how facts have been blurred. But having raised the events in the Middle East, the one fact that I think we can agree on is it's a tragedy. Ordinary people in that region have died and are dying. And the world is stunned. And I'm just kind of starting with simple facts. The triggering event was most probably planned with the media coverage and political impact in mind. I doubt that an operation of that scale would have been planned with that level of sophistication without certain intended outcomes. And now we are seeing the outcomes of the outrages and how they build on one another. And it brings me back to kind of the core starting point of the absolute tragedy. Are we going to allow political leaders and others to continue to manipulate facts, thereby manipulating us and society? I think that is a central question that cuts across. And I take your point. This is difficult. But we come back to trust in government. Sometimes for us to trust governments, they have to do difficult things. They need to take leadership. I'm astounded that governments haven't yet taken much stronger action to safeguard key facts. Let's not make this difficult. Let's not say all facts always have to be verified. The world is too complex for that. But can we just leave this without any intervention? Because literally, as a result of much of this and the emotions, people are dying, and children are dying as we speak. And I just think as human society, we're better than this. We have proved ourselves good at solving difficult problems. It's difficult to engage people when facts are disputed. But perhaps we can be much better at clarifying some facts. And for that, we need improved structures. What they're going to look like, perhaps we need to draw more on the expertise we have and form a future kind of vision of what the basic rules could look like. And you have a role to play in that. And then we can tackle the strategy, because there are clearly players who derive a lot of power from breaking these rules. And they are going to resist change. And they're going to make it very difficult for politicians to do something about it. But currently now, I think the excuse is, well, this is too difficult, is not good enough. Not for them, but not for us either.
Well, what do they mean by this is too difficult?
Well, what's a fact? How do we prove facts? How do we create a system without impinging on a right of free speech? And it has been made difficult. In the past, mainstream media was basically licensed, and there were controls. Social media has made that much more difficult. We've seen what happened to truth on Twitter. It's in the hands of corporations who can actually make much more money by allowing outrage so that there's much more traffic so that they can sell their advertising. But in the end, we control corporations. Corporations are creatures of statute. They're creatures of the law. We can say enough is enough. We're not going to allow this. We can block certain social media companies. China has done that. That also shows some of the dangers. Does that mean we are unable to craft a better solution that is better for healthy political engagement? I think, and again, I don't have clear answers. What I am saying is we really need to engage in debate, and we really need to be more constructive and creative, because we can't allow this situation to continue. It's going to rip our societies and our governmental structures to pieces, and it's going to shred the trust that we have in society.
So are you with more filtering information, or just let it be out there and for people to decide what's true and what's not?
People can't decide what's true and what's not.
Why not?
I think we way beyond that point. deciding what's true and what's not, if you have governments that have experts and funding to fabricate solid gold facts that are fabricated, very difficult to say, well, but everyone else will see through that.
Okay.
They won't.
Okay.
So yes, I do think filtering is part of it. Then the question is, how do you control that filtering? Not to filter out what is undesirable by governments. So how do we create rules around that? And if you say filtering is problematic, what do we do with child pornography, for example? Well, the moment you introduce that, then people say, no, we do think at least that must be filtered.
Okay.
Which means there's support for some measure of filtering.
Yes.
What else could be in that category that we can agree on that's really important? Then the filtering may not be absolute. The filtering may slow down, may allow for a challenge before being released. Filtering itself is also going to be problematic because it's difficult without building a total firewall around the country to filter out everything.
Yes.
And you will find people going around that. Is that problematic, or should you allow that? Say, look, if you so desperately want that, we warn you, there be lions. That's where you want to go there. But we're not going to allow anyone just having an app on their phone to be exposed to that. Do we need far more labeling of what is clearly untrustworthy? Do we allow it through, but with labeling? And then if the filtering is wrong and it filters something that is actually true, that the label can be removed with an appropriate other label that indicated it was flagged, but after due process, the flag was removed. What can we design to help us? Because I don't think the approach of people can find this out for themselves, they will see through it, is valid currently and will be valid in 5 years' time with much more AI intervention.
Well, I think they both have their risks in a way. You just got to decide which one is less, I want to say demonic, the one that's less problematic, the one that's more rational.
So let me take you through a thought experiment. Because again, I'd caution against setting them up against each other, because filtering can be designed in a number of ways. Okay. So you need to match the lesser of the two evils against the different models that allows you to calibrate. There so a great article written a few years ago about whether it is possible to convince ordinary people to have a video camera in their shower. And generally people would go, no, no, not at all, go away. All right, let's say this is not a video camera, it is a little IoT device, video monitoring device. People still say it's a camera, I don't want it. Fine. Let's say this device is opaque. So it can't see any details, but like a scanner telemarine when you go through. Yeah. We don't see all of the details. Yeah. We see the vague shape. Well, people would go, really, so why? Basically, this device is only linked to your local medical facility. It is only available on request of people aged 70 and older living alone.
Okay.
And it is there to ensure that should you slip in the shower, that you would receive a phone call at home to find out whether you're ready or whether support needs to be sent. Let's paint that scenario. Then you might get more people saying, all right, let's have a discussion about that.
Okay.
So you're changing. So, all right, let's see even more. That little device can't send out any video material. It can just send out an alert if your position changes in the shower and doesn't re-change back, indicating that you've fallen over.
And haven't gone.
So it's not you reach out to pick up the soap, but you suddenly went from being there on top to disappearing.
Flat out, yeah.
Then it would just send an alert.
Okay.
That information doesn't go outside your house. So no video goes anywhere, and anyway the video is blurred. Just the alert. And then probably the vast majority of people would say, yeah, no, well, if you can assure me that that's all that will happen, I think this is something that can help me.
Okay.
And then you install a device that people would otherwise have totally resisted with their full support, because it's designed correctly to meet a need that they acknowledge. And it doesn't take more, and it provides much more benefit in return. So that, before you set up filtering and not filtering and false news and filtering as both evils, false news, you can't filter. You can't do this.
Yeah, no.
It remains evil.
Yeah.
But your filter you can adjust until you reach a sweet spot with society, where society goes and says, yeah, no, all right. We're prepared to give this a go, but we want to monitor it, and we want to see where it goes wrong and where it does right, and we will have this as a pilot project for a year. And so you build trust through your design.
Yeah. I think it also has to do with presentation. How you present an idea is very important. It's very psychological. Like, people are very quick to judge. We are very judgmental creatures. Also, can I scoot a little bit this way, please? Because, thanks. We're very judgmental people, and we're very critical. We're all very cynical. No matter how stoic you want to be, at some point you are going to be very cynical about one aspect of your life, at least. It could be yourself. But with something like that, I think the presentation is the most important thing when you come to present something like that to the people. You have to, back to our main point, gain their trust in a way. The whole thing with the example as well, you wouldn't present a treat to a dog that is rotten. They just wouldn't take it. Even if it smells good, they just wouldn't take it, even if it's a good treat. What I'm trying to say is, yes, filtering could be an undesirable thing for many people. I know I'm one of them. I don't like filtering. I don't like filtering at all. But if you present it in a way that's appealing, we could have a conversation then. But with that being said, what is appealing? Because it's going to have to be a very deep presentation. It can't be vague. It can't be shallow. It can't be service level. It can't be something that doesn't provide me value. It's a filter. But what am I getting out of it? Am I able to control the filter? Am I able to put my opinion into the filter? Am I able to say what slides, what doesn't slide? Am I able to kind of work around with this filter? How is this filter going to serve me? How is it going to serve my agenda? How is it going to serve my views? How is it going to serve my opinion? So this is something it could work, yes, especially with skeptics, because they're probably the most cautiously opinionated distrusting strata of the society that we have. And once you gain the trust of a skeptic, I think you're on your way for something that could have a healthy and positive impact on society if done correctly. And you can't take these people for fools. That's one thing that happens far more often than it should. And people take these things for granted. And I don't want to say put like a big umbrella label on governments, but it does happen in governments a lot of the times. People, they take these relationships for granted with people. They don't really go deeper with the people. They don't connect with them on a personal level. They just provide them with a general concept and they expect them to try and understand it. But that's just not the case. And a lot of people more and more are getting more skeptical. We're in a very questionable society. Well, not questionable society. A very, how do I put it? The society likes to question a lot of things. The people today, you see it with younger generations. They always are protesting. They're always voicing their opinion. And I imagine it's the same for their family, because if you have someone who's 20, 21, 25, 20, they're gonna try and send the message to their parents as well. They're gonna try to send the message to their relatives. They're gonna try and send the message to their elders. We question a lot. We have a lot of questions. But with filtering, it's very interesting because X doesn't do it. Twitter right now doesn't do it. There is zero filter in that place. That place is chaos. That place is so bizarre. You log on and you hear 1,000 opinions in one day. 1,000 opinions by one scroll. 1 hour scrolling. You get to see tons of comments, tons of thoughts, millions of people just having impressions on one thing. And it could be as simple as liking something. They don't even have to comment. You see something that's got something like 100,000 likes, that's 100,000 opinions. And if this tweet is in support or, not approving of something, it's gonna sway you one way or another. It has that effect. People do get their opinions from other people a lot more than we think.
But there's a differentiate here. We should allow opinions.
Of course,
I have no problem with opinions.
Yeah, no.
Where the problem is with fabricated facts.
Yeah.
And that can generate opinions, and that's problematic.
That's
but
where
the
it's
starting
problematic,
point is, what might be very interesting is far more social media challenges of people to try their hand at distinguishing between actual and fake news. Because
they do that online.
People may overestimate. Might be little quizzes. It might be, but to challenge people and provide them feedback, to test their own ability to distinguish between false facts. But we are moving into a very difficult environment. We are accustomed to trusting our eyes and ears. AI used in this space will challenge that. So what else do we then use to determine whether Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden or the Premier has actually said that, done that on that occasion?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Dude, I've seen the videos where they could be so bizarre. They could say something so bizarre, right? And it's funny, it's laughable. It's some of the memes they put online. And you don't know if they actually said that or not. It's funny, right? You laugh at it. And after the video, because sometimes it's just AI, but then they could say something that they could really actually say, right? And it's laughable. But then you take a moment while you're laughing and you go, oh, holy shit. Like, I couldn't tell if this was AI or if it was real. Like the day that they had the photos of Trump being arrested, I woke up and I saw the photos. Immediately, I was like, what? You know, like this can't be real. And I went to fact check it, and it turned out that some people freaked out about it. They thought it was real. The mugshot. I still don't know if it's real or not. I have no idea. Is the Trump mugshot real or not? I don't know. Some people say it happened. Some people, I didn't fact check it. Did you?
No, I didn't. Is that the one where he looked cloudy and stormy?
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, it would certainly not have been published by Georgia, so it would have been published by his team.
Yeah. I have no idea. It's bizarre. It's bizarre to look at a former president in a mugshot and go, "Is this real? Is this how?"
And that is the problem. And I do think we might be able to distinguish a set of facts where we all agree more assistance would really be required. And then differentiate that from opinions that people need the freedom to express. And then there's the middle ground where people start expressing opinions based on what's been identified as fake news, which could perhaps be lifted out with clearer labels. But we do need to do better.
Yes.
Because this is really destructive. It's not going to go away. It's going to get worse. And it will be used to manipulate us. And I don't like the idea of being manipulated.
Already is. Already is being used to manipulate people.
Even that, some people may dispute that. But saying it will be used puts it in the future. And few rational people will dispute the potential.
Okay. Why would you do that? It's interesting.
Well, to say it's currently being manipulated means you need to prove. And that brings us back. And at this stage, we don't have a source of authority to say,
True.
So again, you end up in the debate.
Yes.
And that's why for purposes of policymaking, it's better to focus on the future and move people from kind of the current disputes. It is so easy to generate unconstructive discussion and debate about matters, and then to deflect from the real work that needs to be done. So that's possibly why I've just used that as a device to be future focused.
Future focused, yeah. But not to take away from what you're saying, but it does happen. It does happen today. Like I've seen a case of it where Ben Shapiro he posted a photo of a dead baby on his X account. It's not a dead baby. I think it was a dead baby, but people just disproved it straight away like that. And it was an AI generated photo. And that was manipulation in a way. Whether he was aware of it or not, I don't know. In a way, it's propaganda. It's evil. It's manipulative. Now, whether you like or dislike the person, that's beyond the point. It's what the content is. That is false. And people just disproved it straight away, and they got on it like that. And so it does happen today. It's just not as much as it will be happening in the future. And so if something that caused so much outrage now that happened on once every 2-3 weeks, which probably is a very, very off estimate of how much it actually happens, what are we going to do in the future? We're screwed.
And keep in mind, we need to focus on the rational majority. We still have people who believe the earth is flat. We have people who believe Elvis is still alive.
Yes.
And no moon landing took place. It was all staged in Hollywood or somewhere in DC.
How does the Elvis one work? How old would he be by now?
Well, quite old. But yeah.
That's
you find people with interesting views. You can't cater for everyone.
Yeah.
What would work for the rational majority? What would support them? and develop a strategy constructively from focused on them.
Mm. I think in some cases it's the people themselves. As bizarre as this claim is, we need credible people that speak what they think with a loud voice, unfiltered. And at the end of the day, it is very subjective. It's very subjective. But we have few key players today that do that. And people listen to them. It's only a big problem. It's only a trouble when these people that try to voice their honest opinion get controlled. When these people get filtered. Because part of the reason why I'm against filtering is because you gotta dish out whatever is out there and then let the people decide. And yes, it is very subjective. And yes, they could get it wrong 100%. But would you rather trust the people that are reporting the news who have been trusted for quite some time, or the people behind closed doors that are claiming that they know the truth? And, you know, it's a very divisive subject.
I'm always in favor of transparency. I'm always in favor of appropriate processes. We've had great news services. We've had great names, BBC, ABC, but they've all been hollowed out by governments who fund them. Yeah. And I'd be very happy to revert and have the funding restored, because we know we do need sources of truth. My news consumption is varied. Years ago, when I was a student abroad, I was a foreign correspondent. I made money as a foreign correspondent, and I every day I read 10, 50 newspapers.
Every day.
It's actually quite quick, because most of them have the same news. Okay. Most of them, even then, bought the news through kind of Reuters, SAPA, Associated Press, Agence France Presse, and it's repetitive. But you pick up on the outliers after the first 3-4 newspapers. You get a sense of the editorial policy and what's the current issues that are important for them. We have had kind of problematic international coverage. When I'm able to, and I don't have a lot of time, but I try to watch a bit of CNN, and then Sky News, and then Al Jazeera. Because I take all three of them as providing me with a piece of the puzzle from their perspective.
Sure.
We don't have single sources of truth any longer.
No.
You need, but it's not easy to do that.
Something that's not a body.
The best newspaper articles are the ones that they've really invested in, and there's a lot of investigative journalism that has gone into it. All of that has been kind of reduced to social media snippets, tweets, limited words.
It's easy to consume content.
It is.
Yeah.
And all of that content has been reduced and slanted and doesn't provide the comprehensive richness that you as a reader actually require. And people allow that to influence them in their thinking. And it's the here, the now, and especially dealing with situations that have a much bigger context. All of that context just gets lost. It gets wiped away. And that's sad and that's dangerous.
Of course. Yeah.
So yes, sources of truth, but they need to be well resourced, and then we need more of them, and they need to be accessible.
But don't you think, what do you mean by accessible? Because when you say accessible, for me, in a way, it sounds like easy to consume content as well. And that's just kind of like canceling the point out. Accessible, for me, is something that I scroll through Twitter or I scroll through Instagram and I get to see it on my feed. That's accessible. That's probably the easiest of accessibility that you can get to. But you run the risk of not painting the full picture while you're trying to gain engagement, because that's what it's all about. You want the people to engage. At the end of the day, you wanna sell. You wanna provide what sells. You wanna have people engage with your content. You wanna build audience. You wanna gain revenue. And so what is something that's accessible?
You provide the immediate news, the just in, yes. But you also provide the hooks to the more comprehensive coverage. You also cover, in the same way that you cover news, aspects of the complexity of the picture that you're trying to convey. Provide reduced context, provide frequently asked questions. So there are ways of conveying complexity in a way that is accessible by time-poor people. It may not be as comprehensive as we would like, but it does need to respond to society, and it does need to respond to the context in which people kind of consume, I hate that, consume the news, but they do.
Why do you hate it?
Currently, people spend a lot of time listening to opinions.
Yes. They're doing it right now.
And can we switch that or take up some of that time to help them to access more of the facts and challenge them to access more of the facts and make it available?
That's really interesting. That's one of the things I try to do with my audience as well. I always tell people, I always ask questions, because I like this quote by, is it Socrates or Seneca? One of them, I think Socrates, is that he says that I know nothing at all. And it's very interesting to gain opinions. It's very interesting to gain insight, because when you're doing things like these, you're on the other side of it. You don't get to look at it from the viewer point of view, if you know what I mean.
Well, and up to this point, a lot of the discussion is about things where I share my views, not as a scholar or researcher in my field of expertise, but just as an observer and a member of society.
Yes. But you do have an area of expertise.
I do, and that's money laundering and terror financing and proliferation financing.
That's the one. Can you run us real quick on what money laundering is?
Money laundering refers to a set of actions in relation to proceeds of crime. The proceeds of crime is whatever a criminal makes out of criminal activity. Okay. And the classic way to illustrate that is someone who's involved in drug trafficking, who sells the drugs and now has money available. What do they do with that money?
Yeah.
Well, some of it they may invest in buying more drugs to sell. Others, they may invest in their lifestyle, buy a new car, buy a house, fund a house, spend it on friends and parties. All of those actions come within the realm of money laundering. So that's money laundering. Terror financing, I think that speaks for itself. Financing flowing. So the difference is proceeds of crime will always be generated by crime. Terror financing can be generated by crime, but can also be from money earned legitimately. But it's more about where the money is flowing to and for what reasons. And then linked to that is also proliferation financing. So that's financing of weapons of mass destruction. And they are clustered together because there is a key set of international global standards that require every country around the world to have laws in place, criminalizing these activities, have specific bodies in place, have specific obligations for financial institutions, and then also for other high-risk institutions, lawyers, accountants, real estate agents, casinos, so that they identify their customers, monitor their transactions, and whenever they pick up something that doesn't look right, report that to a central financial intelligence unit that collects that data and has it available for law enforcement purposes. So all of this kind of clusters together. The set of standards were formulated about 30 years ago and are in place in about 200 countries around the world.
Was that the AML?
AML, CFT internationally, but in Australia it's CTF, and then CPF, that's the proliferation financing bit.
So how well does it work?
How well does it work?
How accurate is it? How protective is it?
Again, let's break it down.
Okay.
Question is, what is the measurement that we use? If we use as measurement, so how many countries have employed these rules? Well, clearly, the vast majority of countries have. There are two outliers, Iran and North Korea. And hence they are under sanctions. Even Iran has taken some steps towards compliance. But there's a lack of political will. But all of the others comply. So if we look at compliance with the standards, that's high. If we look at institutional compliance levels, it's very difficult. It's well nigh impossible nowadays to open a bank account without those rules being complied with, without requiring you to provide information that you didn't need to provide in the 1980s. So from that perspective, the system is generating a lot of information. Is law enforcement benefiting? We've just seen last week another arrest being made of a syndicate involved, unfortunately, in money ribbons, but they seem to have laundered about 250 million plus on behalf of criminals. So there are enforcement actions taken. There are enforcement actions also taken against banks that haven't been as compliant as they should have been. You might have noticed the Westpac fine of $1.3 billion. Whoa. That's a woe. Commonwealth Bank, $750 million. So big fines are being handed down. So the system is working. Is that lessening crime in society? Do we find less organized crime? That is more difficult because crime itself is not declining. And crime is not declining because we are creating more and more offences every year. Every time Parliament accepts and adopts a new act, there are new offences that I'll generate. But if you look at traditional offences like drug trafficking, it's also difficult because there are more drugs available now internationally, cheaper than before, at a higher quality than ever before, despite all of these rules.
More than the 70s? More than the 70s and 80s?
More than the 80s, yes.
Oof.
Yes.
Wow.
That's highly problematic. But there would probably have been much more were it not for rules like these. We do see criminals going to far greater lengths to hide their ill-gotten gains, which is also an indication that they perceive these laws as working.
Okay.
So they're not working as well as I would have liked them to. But it's also important to recognize that many parts of it is delivering value to society.
How do they hide the gains? What's some things that they do? What is the shady things they do? How do you go about hiding drug money?
Now I'm getting careful. I, for a number of years, served on the Money Laundering Advisory Council to the Minister. And we always said, this is not the Money Laundering Advisory Council, it's the Anti-Money Laundering Advisory Council. Let's just get this clear.
Not that I want to do it or anything.
In Australia,
Yes.
It was clear that many criminals took the proceeds of crime to casinos.
Many criminals.
Many criminals.
Many, okay.
Many.
Yeah.
Hence the big fine against Crown and the other casinos.
Sure.
I was and still am astounded by what happened because everyone knew about that except apparently, according to the regulators, Crown Casino. That's how the corporate regulators, not Allstrack,
Sure.
who levied the fine.
Yeah.
Certainly cryptocurrencies was an option of choice for many years. So we've seen big sums moving into Bitcoin, moving into private coins, some that were specifically designed to make it more difficult to identify the users, especially linked to tumblers and other mechanisms that obscured the path further. Yeah. Now, the problem with crypto was, unlike with a bank account, there was no requirement to identify any person. So all of the transactions are available and transparent. They're on the blockchain, but no one knows whose transactions they are. Yes. Over time, however, capacity developed, forensic companies developed that became very good at getting fairly accurate about who actually owned the wallets.
Okay.
To the extent that we actually saw a dramatic collapse in criminal usage of crypto. And according to some of the studies done, it's probably only between 5 to 7% of crypto that can now be linked directly to illegal activity linked to kind of crypto offenses. And that's a dramatic improvement. Even terror groups, yes. Hamas, months ago warned their supporters not to use crypto any longer. And there was a huge drop-off in the crypto flows then because they were getting very worried about the forensic capability that actually mapped funding flows into their wallets. Now, this was in full contravention of the law, but it just goes to show some of the forensic capabilities that develop. And when there's a problem, a solution will develop. That solution, again, causes other problems. And then over time, further solutions develop. That's part of our human progress. But we're seeing that at the moment playing off in the context of crypto.
Yeah. 5 to 7% is still a huge number, though.
It is. I had a look at the market cap yesterday, and it's over 1.2 trillion.
Wow.
But 93% of that is much, much more. The IMF estimates that about 5% of the global GDP is illicit. It's not a particularly trustworthy estimate, but it's one that's been cited very often. So for some countries, it might be much more. This is kind of a global estimate.
Yes.
So if you think about the size of the global economy and you take 5% of that, it is trillions.
What is the global economy right now?
That I haven't looked at for some time. I need to revise that in the next few weeks because I normally start my lectures in international financial crime with that, and then the statistics, and then I show students just how much $1 billion in cash is in $100 cash notes. But I haven't revisited that for 2 years.
Do you think we should have a look at it right now? Do you think we should have a look at it right
now?
By
all means.
I'll just do a quick Google search. Give a rough estimate. What are we saying? Global, what do we say?
Global GDP.
GDP right now. Okay.
So the one that I cited is kind of the whole crypto market cap and the global GDP.
88 trillion. That's the current
88
worth of goods and services is produced a year.
Yes.
That's equivalent to 2.8 million every second.
So crypto is just over 1%.
Just over 1%
of the global GDP.
No way.
The market cap of crypto.
What?
So, and of that, then criminals are abusing 5 to 7%.
What? That's still a lot of money.
It's still a lot of money, but measure that against the big mountain of money. And that means, if you take 5% of that's big.
That's a big number.
And that's criminal. And this would be drugs. It would be tax evasion. It would be all of the major economic crimes, fraud, scams, trade-based activities that are contraventions of the law.
But that's only 5%. So all 95% is pretty much legal.
Is pretty much legal. And that's where the balance comes in. And that's where most of my work is, to ensure that the laws and regulations that are drafted and the standards that are formulated are not so focused and so heavy-handedly focused on the small number of transactions that it actually complicates the 95% of good business or the lives of ordinary people. And that's where a lot of my work goes into access to financial services, financial inclusion. And that cuts right across the board for a number of different groups and societies, including refugees, including displaced persons, forcibly displaced persons, including those in remote regional and rural areas that have been losing their ATMs, for example, and bank branches, and now have to drive distances to actually access the services they need.
Yeah. But out of this 88, what are the key players? You would think that there's some bodies that represent at least 2-3%, right? Do we know who owns the most majority of the 88? And what is the most majority?
Well, if we look at the wealthiest countries, the slices would basically go US, China, then the big European economies, and then lower down the list. And there are lists available.
Really?
You can look at country GDPs, and you will generate a list.
Who do you think is on the top? US and China?
US at the moment.
More than Saudis?
Yes.
How so?
Yes. Look, Saudis they're part of the G20 economies, so the globally the biggest 20 economies, well, keep in mind, I think a lot of the wealth of Saudi Arabia is concentrated in the hands of the ruling classes.
Yes.
And GDP looks at how the wealth relates to the population.
Oh. Okay, so
also, but it looks at the gross domestic product. The Saudi Arabian economy is probably also more skewed towards oil.
Yes.
Whereas other economies, America's got oil, but it's got many other sectors to its economy too.
So I'm interested to find out which position they are on that list. I actually want to see it, because right now we're talking about a country that could be listed number 5, number 7, when in all reality they could be number 1 and number 2 if the GDP worked in a way where it doesn't focus more on the people rather than the country itself and the assets that they have, because they have a lot of oil.
So they do have a lot of oil, but keep in mind, and I need to kind of correct the people do not play that big a role in the GDP. You know, I was speaking to a lawyer and not an economist, so I need to find my way through the acronyms quickly. But essentially, I think it is the maturity and range of the economy that would be reflected in the GDP. Do you find statistics?
Yes. Number 1 is actually, no, Saudi's not even in the top 10. They are, so according to Immigrant Invest, the top 50 richest countries by GDP in 2023. And so this is an article done by Albert Loff, spoke about the richest countries. Okay. United Kingdom is 31, New Zealand 35. We had Saudi at 23, Australia at 22. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that could make sense.
Okay, I need you to break it down.
It's interesting. I would not have put Australia above
Saudi,
above the UK.
Oh, we are. They're 31. South Korea is 30. They have Japan in 38. The top 5 are actually quite surprising. They're none of the countries we talked about. So it goes ascending: Macau, SAR, number 4 Qatar, number 3 Singapore, number 2 Luxembourg, number 1 Ireland.
Number 1 Ireland.
Yes.
Gross domestic product.
Yes, 2023. Is that surprising too?
That is very surprising. It might be a different list.
Okay.
Because what I have, and this is now from
I'll let you
Wildermeter, who draws on the World Bank, World Development Indicators. US at let's say 25 trillion.
Okay.
China 70.
Oof.
Japan 4. So just 25, 17.
Oh, is that descending?
Yes.
Whoa.
The next level up, Japan at 3. At number 3 with 4.2, Germany with 4.07.
Okay.
Then India with 3.3.
India.
Yes.
They're a large country, you'd think so.
Then the UK this makes more sense.
Okay.
Then France, Russia at 2.2, Canada at 2.1, Italy at 2. So that's flat 2. So we've come from 25. Now we hit 2, and 2 is number 10.
Yeah.
Australia is number 12 at 1.6. Saudi Arabia is 17 at 1.1.
We're still ahead.
So it's still within the top 20.
Yes.
Nearly falling off is Turkey at number 19 with 905.
Okay.
And Switzerland is the last G20 country on 0.8.
Which one is the most surprising in the list?
I wouldn't say any of these are surprising. I've worked with the G20, so I know the delegations around, and these are the ones that I had in mind. But from there, I'm sad is South Africa was part of it and is now at number 37 at 0.4, just after Malaysia and just before the Philippines. But I think this shows just with the US and China combined at 42 and then number 3 at 4.
US and China combined.
Yes.
Are how much?
43
trillion. Oof.
And Japan at 4.2.
That's such a
so these are big.
That's a huge difference.
These are clearly erased China and the US, and China's has had some way to catch up. Yes. But between the number 1 and number 2 and number 3, there is a huge.
It's a huge difference. They're dominating. China and US.
Yes.
Why are they dominating like that? What's the cause behind it? How do they get their GDP up miles ahead of places like Japan, even though Japan does produce a lot of things?
Well, let's look.
I mean, Japan's like far ahead in technology than any other country in the world.
It has 10 times the number of residents.
Okay.
So its population is 10 times that of Japan.
But shouldn't that put India in the brace with?
Well, India's at number 5.
It is at number 5.
So it is not. It's not that far behind Japan.
It's not behind Japan.
And India is coming up. But keep in mind, China has been changing its economy for the past 20 years. It's been one of the economies that have powered ahead. It's powered the global wealth for more than 20 years. So a huge rate of development linked to a huge population that can generate that type of development. So it is a huge market.
Very surprising to see Saudi not catching up.
But in position, let's look at what Saudi has a population of 36 million.
There are a lot of people in Saudi.
That is a lot of people.
Not a lot of people work in Saudi.
But yeah.
What do they exactly factor in to calculate these things? What's the measurement?
I'm a lawyer.
Okay.
So rather get an economist on here who can answer that. I can quickly Google it, but I'd rather leave that to you. I know the limits of my my ability. I love working with economists because we get much better answers together. But it is just very far removed from my field of expertise. That's why I need to work with someone who actually has a very firm grasp of that.
Yes. Actually, can I just get you scoot a little bit here to the left, please? Because, you're more money laundering. Now.
Control.
Just it's a very dangerous statement to make. how much of that wealth in these countries is contributed by through money laundering? Do they even like calculate that into their GDP, or is it just something on the side? Because a few countries are corrupt. They do have systems where money just keeps flowing through the government in shady ways. Do they calculate that and do they factor it into the GDP, or is it just on the side?
Well, the GDP is calculated objectively.
Okay.
Obviously, proceeds of crime filter into that. For instance, it might filter in through the assessment of the wealth of your banking sector. If your banking sector holds a significant amount of proceeds of crime.
Yes.
We do know from earlier studies that probably the biggest haven for criminal money is the US.
Okay.
Because criminals like the stability of the US dollar. And they also want to diversify. It is sometimes easier for them to hold their criminal wealth in different currencies of smaller countries, but then you've got to contend with exchange control, rule of law issues. It's probably reflected in some part of the American GDP. We also know that European countries have benefited from that. The UK, certainly France too. They are also countries that are really leading the push to improve global money laundering standards. They would prefer to have that not in their economies. Laggard in that has been Switzerland for many years. And everyone trusted Switzerland to look after their money, and Switzerland did so with discretion that also interpreted into them not asking any questions. That has also changed.
Well, what happened?
And Switzerland is not the safe haven that it's been in the past.
Okay.
They are cooperating with their counterparts.
Yes.
We've seen a lot of money that has moved to small island economies, tax havens. Some are criminal havens. We've had a number of criminal havens established in the 20th century where essentially the law prevented the banks from asking any questions about the money and criminalized any bank official that disclosed any information to law enforcement.
Whoa.
Yes. And those were jurisdictions targeted, obviously, by organized crime. And it was a way of attracting money to the jurisdictions. Nauru was an example of that in the Pacific. Nauru handled about, I think at the end of the 20th century, 1998, about more than $77 billion of Russian organized crime syndicate money that was then channeled to Bank of New York, one of the oldest banks in the US, where it was laundered a bit more until they got caught, and that was the end of that very old bank.
For how many years did they do that?
For a number of years. And poor Nauru is still kind of laboring under the weight of that history. Unfortunately, there are other islands that were caught up. Normally, these were set up, or these engagements were set up by law firms who wrote the rules and who then provided services to everyone who wanted the services to set up companies. And in these havens, and also organized for things like diplomatic passports, like citizenship, you want a foreign passport, $200,000, and you get one legitimately because you become a resident of a country where you've never been.
Yes.
And you don't need to go there, just pay us. And it really abused the sovereignty of these smaller nations, and it exposed them to a lot of negative pressure. Luckily, we are seeing much of that coming to an end.
Same.
But the Caribbean has gone through the same processes. So the world is becoming more complicated for criminals. And that's good.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course, it's amazing. But that's so fascinating how all of these things can happen while it sounds so organized. It sounds like something out of a movie.
It is very organized, and yes, they were kind of great movies made about this. And The Firm, old John Grisham book, is a good one about that, and that was in the 1980s. Criminals started to launder money when they had a reason to hide their ill-gotten gains from law enforcement. And normally the problem was there's no legitimate way in which you can explain your criminal wealth. So we saw a rise of that in organized crime in the 1930s in the US and the Chicago and New York syndicates. Those involved in the illegal alcohol trade at that stage, the rise of Al Capone. Yeah, and then in the end, Al Capone was convicted not based on organized crime, but on tax evasion.
Yes, I saw that.
So that was an important lesson. And another important lesson was learned after the Second World War. The Allies moved into what was left of Berlin. It was divided between the Allies and Russia. And most of the state buildings were destroyed. And those who didn't commit, the Nazis who didn't commit suicide, they were gone. No one knew where they were. Until an accountant found a book, financial records of a German bank, pointing to a large number of transactions flowing to South America. That didn't make sense. And then they started to follow the money. So kind of these experiences became very relevant in the 1980s when, with the cocaine trade, organized crime started to spin out of control, especially the South American cartels. And it was realized a different strategy was required to act against organized crime. Police were good at catching the street-level criminals, but not the crime bosses. So the enterprise would endure despite law enforcement action at the lower level. But what links the crime boss to the crime at the street level was the money flow.
Yes.
So they basically devised a strategy focused on the money and following the money.
Trail.
And criminalizing what they're doing with the money and then disrupting their financial flows, viewing organized crime as a pathological business and interfering with their money flows. And that's been the key strategy that's basically embedded in the UN Convention on Drugs and Psychotropic Substances in 1988, and then detailed in these money laundering standards that were then rolled out.
Do we still use this system to this day? The
strategy
concept, yeah,
very much so.
Is it still accurate? I imagine with crypto.
I think it's delivering value. I do think that the strategy should be revisited because it focuses on financial flows. In the past 30 years, the telecommunications industry has become another weak point that I think can be addressed much better. Okay. Because organized crime syndicates they're in contact with one another and they communicate. So we're following money, but we might be better off following their communications. So a similar strategy, but broadened, may increase effectiveness. And we've actually seen that being used against organized crime, targeting the communications network through encrypted phones to great effect. So, yeah, I think it's high time. Everything changes in 30 years. That it's worthwhile to reflect on improvements to the strategy as a whole.
Well, how could you track the communication? How can you trust the communication? Because the money is probably more solid to track.
So you might recall about 2 years ago, we had news of a significant success against organized crime globally, and Australia was involved. Essentially, law enforcement set up an encrypted communications network designed for criminals. And they got criminals to sell this to other criminals.
Oh.
They had to buy very special phones that law enforcement will not be able to crack, except law enforcement designed it. And this was provided and bought by organized crime syndicate members globally.
No way.
And they had them planning murders, planning drug consignments, and then at a point, law enforcement in Europe and in the US and Australia at the same time knocked on the doors of hundreds of people globally and rolled them up.
Whoa.
That was a coup. Books, there's been a book written about that appeared in the past three months, but that was really inspired.
Such a huge organization.
And the benefit of that is you create a dilemma for criminals, because if they can't trust that, what do they trust now? So it also has a disruptive effect. By targeting that, you destabilize their trust in communications in general, which means they may prefer in-person communication rather.
Yes.
But that also limits their global footprint and brings it much more local. So it's a good strategy. Yes, it's a good strategy to mitigate organized crime risk.
That's genius to come up with that. That's actually that's out of a movie, if you want, if anything.
Absolutely.
That is out of a movie. But when you say they had criminals or organized deals and organized crimes, was it the government organizing that for them to set them up? Or?
No. Under law, you can't.
Okay.
Because that's entrapment, and that won't stand up in a court of law. They just observed, listened in.
So they tapped in pretty much.
Yes. Was their network.
It's quite smart.
It all flowed through these systems.
Smart, yeah. That's quite genius. You brought up something about Al Capone. Have you seen the movie, was it with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery, The Untouchables? The
Untouchables, indeed.
Have you seen it?
We are team players.
Great movie. Amazing movie.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the fairly gruesome scene where they sat around the table and with Capone walking with his baseball bat.
Yeah.
Saying, we are team players.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen that movie with my dad. It was a great movie. I watched it maybe not last year, 2 years ago. It's a great movie, amazing movie. And the way that, the thing is, when you dive into that whole culture of the mafia, of the cartel, you don't necessarily think of these people as, well, for the majority of the people, they don't think about them as someone that's planned out, someone that's cunning, that someone that's really have dove deep into what they've done. But they have. They've gone into each and every single branch of what they're doing, and they try to explore it. And they have. And they've organized it in a way where they get people on their side to believe in what they think about as well. Because you think about figures like Al Capone, you think about figures like Pablo Escobar, they had their people, they had their henchmen, they had the people that fully supported whatever decision they were going to do. But it's one small little hiccup, and it can lead to disasters. And the thing with Pablo could have been him maybe going into politics, I think, at least. What do you think? From your point of view, what happened there?
Interesting. I think many of them share a measure of a psychopathy that may in some cases make for a career in politics. There are leadership skills, but there's also a ruthlessness involving a level of violence, either directly by the person or indirectly on that person's orders, that provides part of the glue that keeps a crime syndicate together, a crime syndicate of that nature. But we also find that in some cases a culture and an environment develops with its own pathology. But we people aren't crime syndicates that have their own honor code, the own rules of conduct and trust in their relationship with society and with law enforcement. So it's curious, but it remains pathological. I must say I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about how they go about and what motivates them, or how good they are or how bad they are. They're bad for society.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm happy to contribute to making it much more difficult for them to operate and get others involved in their operation. They need new blood to grow. They need young people to join. We need to ring fence that and combat that, because they have a corrosive effect.
What was it like living during the war on drugs? Because that's a timeline I didn't exist in. Was it something that everyone felt around the world, or was it just like, oh, it's happening in America?
Look, so firstly, the war on drugs was a slogan.
Okay.
Basically coined by Nixon. So we have it from the 1960s, 1970s. The use of this war language was linked to the use of drugs by American soldiers in Southeast Asia. So Vietnam at that stage and so forth. And it became a slogan. At some stage, the slogan became used less. But we're not out of it yet. I think we're very much in it. What has changed over time is that the idea that drug trafficking can be combated through law enforcement alone has come under pressure. And in that context, war language may have a place politically, and the strategy has become more sophisticated to also provide support and address the reasons why users would be using drugs and assisting the users to move out of the clutches of those who enrich themselves illicitly by supplying the product. Years ago, while I was in South Africa, we were discussing legalizing marijuana. There was a brilliant article written with interviews with some of the illicit growers, and they were horrified because it would destroy their market. So the last thing organized crime wants is for drugs to be legalized.
Then why don't we legalize it?
You asking the question. It's controversial.
Yeah.
It's probably, there's always the fear factor that if we legalize it, everyone will end up being hooked. There's been attempts to provide it in different ways that if you are already hooked, that can be proven medically, then you don't need to resort to crime to pay for your habit. You can actually get it, like medicine, together with a program to get you off it. So there are interventions possible, and all of this will limit the ability of organized crime to feed off vulnerable people. You would have seen, I think it's ACT is either has or is in the process from this week onwards to legalize possession of small quantities of illicit substances.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing more of that being rolled out.
We're already more progressive in Australia about these things.
It is, and it limits the space for organized crime. So it seems that organized crime here has started to move into other areas, including cigarettes, which is basically tax fraud. So illegal import of cigarettes.
Is that easier to track and punish than it would be for drugs?
I think that the negative impact on society is a bit less than hard drugs.
Yes.
But obviously there's a problem. I think the biggest problem at the moment in Melbourne is the levels of violence between the different syndicates involved in that business.
Yeah.
And that poses a threat to society. But from a broader perspective, having interventions that render the serious drug trade less desirable for organized crime, I think is good for society in the longer run. Unfortunately, whatever we do to combat crime, we often end up displacing crime. So instead of criminals saying, wow, this has now become too difficult to make money out of crime, let's get honest jobs, they start doing something else.
Illegal, yeah.
So we need to adjust strategies and suppress that activity. And I think we need to think about success in that context. But moving them away from what was highly problematic at the end of the 20th century, I do think can be clocked up as a win.
Yeah, because ideally getting rid of crime is just impossible. And trying to set someone straight on a path that they haven't been straight their whole life for is even more difficult. I'm not saying that it can't happen. Some people do want to get out of that life and make a change for themselves. It's highly difficult, highly unacceptable by their own gangs at times, but we've seen it happen. And so based on the fact that it's more difficult for you to, or not more difficult, you'd want to corner them in a space where they are doing the illegal stuff, but you want to also put the fire down on the effect that it's having. So you want to kind of tone down the negative effect of what's happening to people. And we kind of give that power in a way as a government or as a society when we criminalize drugs and we criminalize marijuana in a way. We do give it that power. Sure. I'm not saying that making it legal could help, but also why make it illegal when you have something as simple as alcohol being legal? It does have negative effects, and arguably far more negative than it would be for marijuana and for drugs. It makes someone more aggressive. We've seen what alcohol does. A lot of court cases come out of alcohol abuse, right? But that's legal, and you can reach that any point, any second, any time. Marijuana is something that's a little bit more tricky because right now Australia has been more in opening its arms to marijuana, because you can argue that marijuana doesn't, you did not argue, I think it's 90%, 80% fact that marijuana makes you more relaxed, and we've seen that work on patients with Parkinson's, and that's why it's used as a
and there's medicinal marijuana that's different.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, I don't recall a case of someone being more aggressive on marijuana. Actually, drugs, on the other hand, is more tricky because I had a conversation with my friend Milad. He's also a lawyer. He got married 2 days ago, actually. So if you're listening, congratulations, brother. He was talking about how...
Indeed, congratulations.
Indeed, congratulations. He was talking about how it's got a ripple effect. And so once you take coke, then you proceed to heroin. Once you proceed to heroin, you proceed to acid. Acid takes you to something, LSDs and whatnot, and then you've just fallen off the ledge, right? And it's very hard to come back from that. And yes, he's right. But go ahead.
Why do you say he's right?
He's right that it does have the potential to ripple and spiral.
How big is that potential?
I don't know.
And that is where it might be useful to look at actual experiences of countries like the Netherlands that have been far more permissive.
They have been.
And we've heard about that thin end of the wedge concern for many years.
It's a fear factor.
Again, that's why evidence-based policy is helpful. It does not seem as if that fear eventuated in the Netherlands. So we can actually move that debate along a bit. If you delve more into the history of marijuana prohibition in the States, it is interesting that initially a lot of the opposition was led by cigarette manufacturers, tobacco, the tobacco industry.
Because it would screw up the whole business.
It was a competitor business. I'm not comfortable using marijuana. But I also look at it just from an evidence-based policy perspective, and if we look at the broader context, there is space. Even the Netherlands have controls. You can't just freely
use it.
Grow. There are limitations.
Yes.
You may not have, I think, more than 3 plants, and they are horrified when people break that law. It's essentially about personal use. It's not a free for all. Given where we are, I always think there's space to consider whether the solutions to our problems are the best ones that we can have, and whether improvements may be made. And I think this is an example of another one where that can be considered. And again, it's not a question of either the one 100% or either the other 100%. we can craft solutions and we can build in controls if it should prove that we allow more risk than we're comfortable with, that there are more things going wrong than we anticipated. We can build in those controls and we can roll back systems.
If you could list marijuana, alcohol, and drugs not being drugs, psychedelic drugs, just the what's the term for them? They have a separate term. Medical drugs? No, they're not medical drugs. Pharmaceutical drugs. Pharmaceutical drugs. Which one do you think is more dangerous, or more likely to have more negative effects?
Again, there's a range of pharmaceutical drugs. So everything you buy in a pharmacy, some of it you can buy off the shelf. It's still pharmaceutical. Others are controlled. Some you can only get on prescription. Others you can get, but you first need to speak to the pharmacist. So they are coded in terms of risk. Clearly, those that you can access easier are going to pose a lesser risk than the other two. Yes. But those that are severely controlled are controlled because they do pose a risk. So it's important to kind of break them down. Of these, pharmaceuticals are subject to controls. Alcohol is subject to controls. You need a license to sell them. Yes. So there are controls in place. To buy them as well. You can only get them in specific places. So we have a good system of controlling risks that can inform more appropriate measures than outright just single black-white bans.
But I think people are more and more trying to push these boundaries and expand it, especially when it comes to these things.
Well, we also have problems, creating places where those who need to can kind of injection houses can inject themselves.
Safe injection house, yeah.
And that's controversial for anyone living close to a proposed injection house. So it requires broader support in society and people to engage with the problem as a whole. And again, solutions cause problems too.
Yes.
Nothing is perfect.
No. What do you think about the injection houses?
I can see the need for them. I can also appreciate the sensitivity around them, especially where there's evidence that they attract people who then, for some reason, end up failing to use, and you have people shooting up all over the neighborhood instead of at the safe injection house, and leave paraphernalia around where kids may find it. Yeah. That's problematic. I don't know enough to know what causes that behavior, but I do think a compact is required. So between the society where it's put, those who provide it, and those who benefit from the services. Yeah. So this is acceptable behavior and this is not. And if we have unacceptable behavior, it's going to lead to a loss of the facility.
I think the outrage came more for the reason that people are essentially paying for these places, because essentially it is taxpayer money. That's why the people are outraged. And whenever there's money involved and taxpayer money, people are always going to be outraged. And rightly so, essentially,
Well, the problem is we always pay for it. We also pay for the national health system that people who fall ill because of sustained usage will end up in. Right. We pay for the education system that needs to look at kids
And a
who
lot
were
of people
affected.
are pissed off at that
So,
too.
but very few of them would say a baby born who haven't asked to be born to a mother who was affected by drugs, and hence it impacts on the baby's development, that we should stand away from that baby. And if they do, well, I don't care that much for. I won't put as much weight on their opinion.
Yeah.
So
They're out
again,
there.
it's important to step back and look at the broader picture.
Yes.
My only point is, our taxes support all of the impacts. And I think an intervention here, especially when it's linked to programs that can pull people into rehabilitation, is a much better spend of money than spending money on the consequences later down the line. I think it's less. I think it's better for society. I think economically it makes better sense.
Well, sure, it's better than the transparent toilets they put in the city. That was a waste of money. I don't know what to think about that. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Really?
Yeah.
The transparent toilets in the city. So it's a transparent toilet box, and you walk in, and as soon as you walk in, you hit lock, and it just fogs up.
Ah, right. I've seen some of them. Well, if you go to the Netherlands, they are transparent.
100%.
They
Without
open.
fogging up?
What? The Netherlands is different.
How do you pee in front of people? So do you just walk in and...
Literally sometimes into a planter box where plants are growing. That is what they provide.
So is that a room that's transparent all around?
It's often not a room. It is just a metal facility that is fully transparent and open, perhaps with some kind of strategic shielding. It is different. It is. Yes, and I recall that in Belgium too.
Dear Lord. That's crazy. Imagine trying to take a piss. Some asshole comes around just trying to take a peek at you.
No, because that's just not socially acceptable.
Yes.
And it's not acceptable, obviously, to focus on people using the facilities. It is just, there's a different set of societal rules in place, but that's how they deal with it.
You'd hope so. But you'd get those random foreigners every now and then that are, you know, the tourists that take photos of everything. They see a guy just taking a piss, they go and take a photo of the guy. for the album. That's crazy. Europe is different. Europe is very different, and I can't wait to go. I've never been. Every time I hear stories about Europe, they always say that it's a very different place.
And it differs because you get southern and northern. So again, Spain is not the same as the Netherlands. Is not the same as the British, that I would still classify as Europeans, even though they're not part of the EU anymore.
Yeah, that's weird. Yeah.
Or the Irish. So yeah, it's an interesting part.
Are they more conservative southwise?
Yes, they are. They are.
Why is that?
Influence of the Roman Catholic Church. That's been much stronger and still is very strong in Italy, in Spain, and still very influential in France. It's cultural. There were linkages also between the old empires. I've now spent quite a bit of time in Barcelona. That's part of the old kingdom of Aragon. And the Kingdom of Aragon had linkages with, well, it basically overlapped into the southern part of France, and they had huge trade relations with Italy. So culturally, there was a mix, and we know a lot of that endures.
Yeah.
But a lot of that also had to do with the Roman Catholic Church.
Do you think the Arabic invasion has something to do with it as well?
Which invasion are you now referring to?
I'll say the word invasion is a big word. It's more the well, it is an invasion. They call it futuhat in Arabic, more like openings, but it was invasions. It's the Islamic invasions back in
Right in about 800.
yeah, something
Oh,
because
look,
they left a mark.
They left a mark, and
Yeah.
they left great architecture.
It's beautiful.
Alhambra,
Yeah.
Alcazars, all
The Andalus is very beautiful.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And then Toledo, not only Andalusia, they left an incredible mark.
Yeah.
But the power dwindled. And was it 1492 when they were finally lost Granada and the Alhambra and handed the keys over to Isabella and Ferdinand. And that was very much the church. So these are certainly from that point onwards, the power of the Catholic Church, especially through the Inquisition, became very noticeable in Spain. And of course, very, very shortly thereafter, they started to also evict all Jewish people.
Why Jewish people?
Because they weren't Roman Catholic. It was part of an ethnic cleansing that took place. And the Moors, as they were known then, they were far more tolerant of differences in these societies. But after Ferdinand and Isabella, that the tolerance levels started to decline, and it became very, very much in Spain, Roman Catholic focused. And yet, interestingly, they did still appropriate a lot of Moorish architecture, because the Moorish architects and the builders were the great builders. Yeah. So if you wanted your palace built, they were going to be built by the people who could, and with them, they brought their style. Yes. So despite this cleansing, there was also, in a sense, a cultural appropriation of elements that endured for many years.
Yeah, you can't just wipe that out quite easily, actually. It's very hard to. Like, till this day, we see monuments that have been around for ages. Ages. Right? One of them is the pyramids. How long has the pyramids been around for? Something like 4,000, 5,000 years must be at least. Do we even know how long it's been around? I don't know.
No, we do have estimates.
Exactly how long?
Yeah, probably not pinpointed to the year, but because we've got timelines of the various kind of pharaohs that were buried. We have some idea, and yes, they are thousands of years old.
But even then, we have an idea of how they built the pyramids.
No, we don't. We've got theories about how they did that. That's what I was going
to say. Yeah, we have an idea that even then, is that really something that we can put a finger on? Because those things are heavy as hell, the blocks that they had. They're heavy. The idea that,
and the planning, the positioning,
crazy.
The scientific knowledge required to do that.
It's insane.
It is.
It's insane.
Yes.
No one could ever put a finger on what the hell they did. No one. We can't. They operate in a different dimension. They operated with different instruments. They had different technologies. They had different mindsets. We have no idea of how capable these people were. Not in the slightest. We have no idea about the technologies they had. And yet we sit and ponder about it.
Also look at the Persians. Also, the ancient civilizations around the Mediterranean.
Mesopotamia.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we there was an incredible wealth of knowledge that was available and that we've lost access to.
It was so bizarre.
And often it was wars that destroyed the libraries, wars that killed the scientists.
Yeah, Genghis Khan.
And Spain, if they had retained more Moorish scientists, if they had retained their Jewish philosophers, their mathematicians, the country might have been very different today.
100%. 100%.
That's why tolerance is so important.
But we may never know. It's just lost, I wouldn't say potential, lost societies. Atlantis being one of them.
Yes, that was probably a natural event.
Yes, that was a natural event, but still, till this day, they haven't found it. But they think they know where they found it. I saw a guy online that he's basically claiming that I don't know if this is where, I'm not saying this is where Atlantis is, but this is where Atlantis is, and they go by predictions and whatnot. The theory he has is pretty insane because there's a spot in the ocean that matches the exact description of what Atlantis looked like and where it was geographically, and what was around it as well. And it's a very solid theory. It's a very solid theory, but albeit it's a theory. We may never know. We may never know. Even with Mesopotamia, like to this day, we have the small little architects that we have, not architects, like the small little souvenirs that we have till this day, but we can never imagine what that place looked like. We can never imagine what the Andalus looked like. We can never imagine what ancient Mesopotamia looked like. Even Egypt, like the whole thing with the pyramid, we think that we know what it looks like, but we don't. For all we know, they reckon that they had a golden sphere at the top. You know, it's insane. It's crazy. It's crazy the way they operated.
Well, it's possible, although they have for some of the pyramids. There's one in particular. They found the capstone. So literally, it looks like that little bit, and it's the bit that fitted on top.
That was gold.
And no, that it's black basalt rock that's carved, and they got it in the museum. So, and it's huge, and so we know that would have fitted, and I don't think that would have allowed, because it's got a point, would have allowed for more on top. But it might have been clad in different ways, and we now know that many of the buildings we look at was actually painted. Lots of reds and blues that were used that got vanished. We know a lot of the statues that we look at, the Greek statues, the beautiful marble, were painted.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And now it looks quite garish to have AI kind of paint them in. It looks, that looks tacky, but that was
the art
probably
form back
closer
then,
to what it looked like.
Yeah, even the Greek society, even the ancient Greek society, because these places, you look at them and you can feel the history. I walked in the river that, what's it called in the Arabic? I forgot, the one that Jesus got baptized in. The one in Jordan. I don't know what they call it. Nahar something.
Well, our Bibles call it the Jordan, the Jordan River.
Yeah. Wait, what? Is it?
The River Jordan.
River Jordan, yeah, I think so. Nahar Jordan. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Jordan.
Yeah.
I have it.
Yes. But like, what I'm trying to say is, you walk into this place and you feel the historical impact of these places, whether it's a ancient Roman cities, the architect are there. I'm going to Egypt in December and January, and I can't wait. I can't wait to go to that place. I've never been.
That will be fabulous.
Yes. I've never been to Egypt, and I have like a whole thing planned out. I will go to Luxor, I will go to Cairo, and I told my mom and I told everyone, if I stand within 2 meters within the pyramids, I might shed a tear.
Fantastic.
It's amazing.
Very glad to hear that.
Thank you very much. Now,
right. Now, I'm afraid I will have to be on my way.
I know.
It's been a real pleasure speaking to you.
Yes. Very good to see you. I have a lot more to ask, but maybe I'll leave it for another time.
Thank you so much.
If you could
thank you. It was great to engage you, and good luck. You're really doing great work here.
Appreciate it, man. It's good to see you too again. It's very good to see you. But I'll let you go. It's been quite a pleasure to see you again, Louis. And thank you for taking the time. Thank you for doing this, man.
Thank you, Fedele. I appreciate the opportunity.
Where can people find you? I know you're active on LinkedIn.
Yes. University of La Trobe Law School. And they're very welcome just to Google my name, which is a combination of French and Dutch.
Is it?
But yes,
the Louis
is French.
Okay.
The De Koker is Dutch.
Okay. So are you part French and part Dutch, or?
That is very typical of South African names.
Because
it was established as a Dutch colony, and then 30 years later, the French Huguenots were accommodated.
Okay. So you're South African, basically.
Yes, South African born.
Johannesburg?
Bloemfontein. Yeah, no, actually, Johannesburg. I grew up in Bloemfontein, but I was born in Johannesburg. Yes.
You went to the University of Johannesburg, didn't you?
I lectured there, but I went to the University of the Free State in Bloemfontein, which is right in the middle of South Africa.
Nice.
Where I grew up.
Nice. Quite the journey, man. I can't wait to see you again. Thank you for doing this. Thanks, guys. Thanks. Oh, Jesus, I can't speak anymore. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening wherever you are. This has been Louis De Koker. He's a great friend of mine.
Indeed. I'm honored.
Thank you very much, man. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Exxon. Thank you, Spectrum, for providing space. And if you guys need any questions, have any questions, you know where to find me. You know where to find Louis now. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you.